we've got the Mountain Village well exploration, and Mark Cunnane's on the meeting. I've got 2 PowerPoints. We'll start with the first one, which is the Mountain Village well exploration. Mark's report is in the board packet, and he's going to go over that with us. Mark, I'm going to go ahead and pull up your first presentation here.
See him on the meetings anymore.
Mark, can you hear us all right?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. So you'll be operating the slides, Ron?
I will.
Okay. Well, this is just the test well 7 site. Just kind of a background photo, so we can go ahead and move on. Next slide. Okay, so this past season we drilled and tested test well 8. So that's I'll show that where these locations on a map on the next slide. And then we drilled test well 10. Those are both right in Mountain Village. We didn't drill test well 9. There was a few site issues with it, but also it was targeting some of the intrusive sort of volcanic rock, and we just have not found that to be water bearing. So I've got a suggestion for a relocation of that well that we'll go over in the presentation. So here's a map showing kind of relevant wells to what we did this past season. So you can see 8 is along Sitting Bull Road down there in the lower left, in that ski area parking lot. And so that well is, it's near the sewer, closer than you would like. We can, you can apply for a deviation from DEQ for that. But the reason that well was put over there is we didn't know the water production potential of the site, and putting it out in the parking lot would interfere with that use of the property. So we put it over to that side position. And 10 you can see is in the kind of the lower right. That's also a big ski resort property there. And so that site lines up with sort of the same geology that existing Mountain 4 and 7 are in. So that was kind of the idea behind that. What I'm also showing on this map is well 7, which was already drilled, and well 2, which was drilled 2019. Well 7 was drilled 2020. And I show that yellow line, that's the hinge line of a fold.
Apparently that is the way that law is written.
We call that middle fork anticline. So that's kind of what 7, 8, and 2 are targeting, because you see on those structures, you see fractures, tension fractures that enhance permeability and can improve well production. And generally, we've seen good permeability in those 3 wells. So we can go to the next one, Ron. There we go. So here's just the well logs. Now, the one on the left is test well 8. And so that location could have artesian flow. And as it is, the static water level in that well is about 3 feet below ground. So we didn't get the artesian well, but the artesian flow, and that's fine. It's no problem. So, but anyway, to be able to control that, this well, we drilled a 10-inch hole down to 136 feet below ground, then set 6-inch casing in that and cemented it in. So that makes this well actually comply with public water sealing requirements. So this well can be used as is. And that's also true for test well 7. You know, they're both built. They're not the size we would probably have launched off with for a production well, but actually for the conditions we've seen, they're fine. So this well, though, it produced quite a good flow during drilling, and so you can see that middle column. Those numbers are estimated gallons per minute discharge. So as you're drilling these wells, you're airlifting water out of the well, and we're able to estimate the rate, and that's what those numbers are. So interestingly, the water production out of this hole primarily comes out of the shale formation, which is, you know, it's the Thermopolis formation, is it I've mentioned before. We did pick up some more water in that sandstone down at the bottom, but for the most part, most of that water is coming out of fractured shale. And existing well Mountain 6 is kind of the same way. And I think it's also in this Thermopolis shale. Yeah, so this well was going to go into the Cunnane, which is down below. And, you know, we did touch down into it at 396 feet. But at that point, I recommended we go ahead and stop there and test this, because well 7 is in the Cunnane. Okay, they're only 450 feet apart. And this well, we're not in the Cunnane yet, but we're seeing actually really good production and enough water for it to be a well as it sits. So stopped drilling and then did pump test this well, which I'll go over in a few minutes. Now, test well 10 on the right side, that was targeting the intrusive rock. Now, the rock at this location is tilted from horizontal about 56 degrees to the east. So it doesn't make for very efficient drilling at that angle. You know, you're drilling almost 2 feet of rock to penetrate what would be 1 foot of formation if you were drilling a horizontal. So anyway, that has caused this well to be a little deeper than you would have liked. But the short story on it is we went through 220 feet of intrusive, which really is about 110 feet of formation. And it was just dry. We picked up about 40 gallon a minute total, which came from sandstone layers on either side. The intrusives, that magenta colored zone, penetrated about 345 to 565 feet. So, you know, we're not seeing what Mountain Village 4 and 7 are drilled into at this location. And there's, you know, I'm not recommending any additional testing or any further use of this site, you know, based on that well. Okay, Ron, we can move to the next one, please. So we did a step rate test in well 8. The driller provided the temporary pumping system and installed all that equipment. So we did a step rate test, and then we came back and did a constant rate test. And the step rate test, this is in the data for it's in my memo. I won't go over it today, but that indicated we could run our constant rate tests at about 200 to 225 gallon a minute. And we ended up running it at 220 with some minor fluctuation around that rate. So what we saw is that in test well 8, the drawdown continued through the duration of testing, and the recovery was not what you'd hope for. So we're seeing again, and I'll show you this, we're seeing the effects of boundaries on the aquifer, which we've seen in test well 2 and test well 7. So we've pretty much nailed down that condition. We also saw it in Mountain 5 and Mountain 6. This lower plot is showing the water levels, the lower right, it's showing the water levels for test well 8, test well 7, and test well 2. So the district purchased some water level sensors, and they're still in these wells. And so that's what we've been using for the testing. And Jim and Jake know how to get that data and have been doing that part of the project. So, but it's interesting, or maybe not desired, but surprisingly, test well 7 and test well 2 both responded very strongly to pumping in test well 8. Now, 2 also is a Cunnane well. So what you're seeing is interconnection in the rock formations from, the lower Thermopolis all the way down through the Cunnane. I wasn't quite expecting that, but that's why you test them. So, we had like 27 feet of drawdown in test well 7, 450 feet away, and 25 feet of drawdown in test well 2. That's about 1,850 feet away. I think it's 1,865. And so the way I'll show you how I modeled it, but the way I'm kind of thinking of this system is, we're seeing good connection along that anticline trend. And so, likely that peters out to the sides of the anticline, so that's where the boundary effect takes place. We can go to the next one, Ron. So here's the hydraulic analysis that I do to estimate what our well capacity can be. And I've discussed this with you prior in relation to the other wells where we've seen the bounded response, which is well 2, well 7. Those are the only other 2 we tested. And this upper left plot, you can see that the slope of that drawdown, the little circles on the top line, top data points, those are the drawdown measured in the well. The little plus signs are the slope of that line, and you can see they continue to increase. So that's kind of your tip off that you have this bounded response. And then in the upper right, that plot, if you didn't have the bounded response, all those points would stay on that line. So that's the other indication that that's occurring. And so in order to project, design rate and volume for this well, I fit a model to these data, and that's shown down in the lower left. The line is the model. And what's important about that is I'm fitting the general trend of the data and the slope, so the upper line and the lower line, at late times. So because we're going to extrapolate, so we want to make sure we're fitting in that late time. And the way I'm doing it, I've just got parallel boundaries, 1,000-foot offset, kind of to the northwest and southeast from the well. And you could do it other ways and get a good fit. These solutions are non-unique. But the important thing about them is to get something that, you can be comfortable with. You're using your data set to project for longer pumping times. And I think this model does that pretty well. And if you look at the plot in the lower right, the upper points are the pumping well, test well 8. The red points are test well 7. And the green points are test well 2. So generally reasonable, fit of those data. And so I think we can go to the next one, Ron. Yeah, go to that. Okay. So water quality, I guess I've got the yield, and I ended up estimating that well for 110 gallons a minute, 56 acre feet a year. That's on the following slide. But anyway, the water quality was good.
I was surprised you didn't have sulfides for the fact you're producing mainly out of the shale units.
Yeah, there wasn't a whiff of them, you know. We did measure sulfide non-detectable, but I also, in the field, I'll collect it in a bottle and shake it up and uncap it. And, that's one way you can kind of get an idea if you've got sulfide. And yeah, there was no odor with it. It did have a lot of carbon dioxide in it, which is not uncommon, especially in these aged formations. But it degasses. So that's the case where, you fill up a bottle and it's cloudy and you let it sit for 30 seconds and it's crystal clear. That's kind of how this water is coming out of the ground. But the iron and manganese was non-detect. The sulfide, arsenic was non-detect. The radionuclides, you see very low level detections, other inorganics too. It did not measure the organics. So typically don't worry about those in wells like these, because they've got to be related to some sort of anthropogenic input. And we just don't have that sources, to get to these depths. In a well sealed like this, but the dissolved oxygen is non-detectable. Not surprising there. The one thing about this is like well 7 had arsenic, it had iron and manganese, it didn't have sulfide. But you think when you pump a well like this and with that kind of hydraulic connection, there's certainly a chance that water quality could change to some degree over time. And particularly when you produce a well longer duration, you'll start to produce from zones that may not have been contributing much during this short-term test, but could contribute more, a greater proportion of the flow over a longer pumping period. So you might see that water quality change, but at least from what we have, that's a good result. So you can go ahead, Ron, to the next one. So the one thing about that design rate and volume is, and here it is, I've listed it here, and this is in the report also, the 110 gallon a minute, 56 acre feet, that the 110 gallon a minute is modeled pumping rate for 180 days continuous pumping to use up the available drawdown in that well. The 56 acre feet is 5 years. So we're getting out there quite a ways, right? But as compared to the time period we tested, which was 3 days. But what I can't do with the model is, know how that, is that capacity going to stabilize, and are you going to go on with this use indefinitely, or are you going to start to see that curtail with time? I don't know that, so that's why I've got that caveat, production capacity could diminish with use. Maybe better than I modeled. Typically with that kind of trend though, the way that data continued, wouldn't really expect that, but there's always surprises. Completion phase, I didn't do a cost estimate, but the way pricing is now, I would expect something on the order of $500K to get this well connected to the system. Of course, that work can be done in the planning phase, but the discussions we've had, with Jim and Ron, is this would connect into the upper system. So it would connect into a pipe very nearby that would go to the cascade booster. And I understand, there's treatment considerations for 5 and 6, and that kind of all happen in the same place. So, this would be a fit. This whole project started with the intention of getting water for the Cascade system so that that system could at some point be made into its own system. So this well could contribute towards that goal. Well 7 and well 2, I had thought well 7 was a candidate, not really well 2. First of all, wells 2 is not built to comply with DEQ standards. So you would need to do some more drilling at that site and testing, et cetera. But it's also a more costly well to connect to the system. But with that degree of interference that I was discussing earlier, I would hold off on either of those. Continue with the monitoring, reassess, and maybe consider provisions for well 7 to come online, but at least hold off on it for the immediate future. The other well, this is going back to the wells drilled in 2020. TW6 was actually penetrated pretty good water. This is up in that Montana Club area on a utility lot. It's actually a really nice site for a public well. But it would have to be rebuilt also. It had some unusual water quality, and there was deeper drilling there, but it would be required. But it was one of the other wells where we actually hit pretty good production. We had about 150 GPM being produced out of limestone in the top of the Kootenai at that site. But that's, right now I don't see connecting that. I guess, we could discuss that some more. There might be some interest to look further at that site. The situation there is, as I show you, the arsenic was higher than the MCL is 10. That's micrograms per liter is those units. You'd be, you're too far away up there to pipe this into a central treatment, facility located at Cascade. So you pretty much have to go right into system at that well. So that's kind of a strike against it also. And then lastly, TW9, and I've got some discussion on those Flatiron Montana wells. And then talking about this with Jim and to a lesser extent, Ron, you could drill this test down by that Thunderwolf chairlift. And, I have it in the 2009 source capacity plan, that andesite mountain anticline, as a target. Now, we haven't drilled down there as part of this project because the goal is to get water for the Cascade part of the system. But, one of the benefits of a well down there is, and of course, there's some engineering to be done, but, you could potentially serve Lone Moose and Aspen Grove off it, reduce demand on the mountain supply. So it's basically has a beneficial effect to Mountain Village overall. So, that's an option. You'd need permission again from Big Sky Resort, but they've got a big piece of ground right down in that area off of Low Dog Road. And there's other choices. It doesn't have to be right there at the chairlift. I kind of just pencil that in for location consideration and for ease of discussion here today. But there's that structure has quite a bit of extent, and there's other places back towards Mountain Village that a well could be tested. So that's something to look at. Could be drilled. Probably late spring, early summer next year. So that's, sorry, go ahead.
Test well 9 was originally up in the Mountain Village area, so this would just move that test well to this location. Test well 9 was included in the
It was
scope.
on Rising Bowl, right?
Right, and so this was part of the original scope, was to drill that. Mark's proposing that we consider moving.
No, that Rising Bowl work's done, Mark. I mean, we're out of there pretty much, just filling in that whole wood cutting area, so.
Well, like Mark said before, the reason, we've learned a lot about that target formation that isn't producing from it. So why one more there?
It's tied in.
The strategy is.
Access may be a little challenge. We just noticed a landowner on Low Dog cut off our access to come up that 2-track where they drilled those other wells and Spanish Peaks and that. So.
Mark, what was static water level on well 8?
3 feet below ground.
So that triggered our whole UV project for the meadow here. We had static water less than 25 feet on meadow wells 4 and 5. The district spent about $700,000, maybe $800, doing that UV project for the disinfection.
More like $1 million.
You won't, this well, you know, you have to submit, but this well's in a confined aquifer. Okay, so when you're in a confined aquifer, you're not subject to the full-time disinfection standard. And I would expect this well to achieve that. DEQ would agree with that. So you're not going to fall into that same situation as you did in the meadow. But the issue with this one is the proximity of the sewer. And I have discussed that at least with one of the engineers at DEQ. And you can certainly submit for deviation. And given how this is sealed, they never really know how they're going to feel about it till they get that in front of them. But they thought it was, quite not terribly unreasonable. If for some reason they just flat out, no, you can't put a well there, well, that's when we'd have to re-drill this well. It's not a particularly expensive well. The riskier part of that, or the impact of that is when you move off, you might not hit quite the same. But we have enough stratigraphic control in that area. We could pretty much move off and find the same stratigraphy. Just a matter of if we get as good of fractures. I mean, there's of course always a chance you could get better, but that's a possible outcome from this is in exchange for that proximity to sewer. If this is going to go into a central treatment system, you're going to have to disinfect that water anyway. And so that would make a stronger case for the district in that deviation, as if this well is going to be rolled into treatment, where you would, in all likelihood, probably disinfect with chlorine. That would be a good candidate for avoiding having to move this. I think you'd get that deviation approved.
So I just pulled up a map view, approximate location of well 8. Sewer runs right along the road here, not very far. What's the setback that would be triggering a deviation, Mark?
100 feet. Yeah, so it's 100 foot of horizontal setback. We've got 136 foot of cemented pipe in the ground. So, and with that treatment system, I don't know the status of that, but if that goes forward, and that's how this is tied in, I think you'd be okay.
So, Jim, you want to comment on the hydraulics of this? Let me back out. So we've got this dedicated line that runs up to the Cascade booster station.
Zoom in a little bit
Where the well is.
One of the benefits of this location, look, we're too far, the The test well's right here.
Well, you need to, Jim, come back and talk to the mic. I'll
Oh, okay.
just use the mouse to
Sure.
point stuff out.
Well, the goal is to get water to the cascade, make Cascade be independent of the meadow system like it was originally. This well is in a good location to contribute to the Cascade side because here is the location of the test well. Got the issue with the sewer, but as Mark said, we've got a lot of things going in our favor to not make that a big deal. But this pipeline where you see here, there's two of them. One of those is a force main where we are right now bringing the hill water up to Cascade. So this is a force main going directly to the Cascade booster. So the distance to tie this into Cascade is literally from here to here is all it is. It's a very good location for that. And that could be, and you know, that, for instance, the Flatiron well, when they brought up the issue of using that water clear down the Lone Moose into this system, monumental task of getting it up there because of the distance and the pipe. This water here, location, would be in an excellent area for it. And then, as Mark brought up, the disinfection issue is almost a moot point because remember, no one well is going to take care of Cascade. We're going to resurrect Cascade 5 and 6. We have to deal with the H2S. We've got treatment for that, you know, reason. And with this well, and we've discussed some strategies of maybe using one of the others, you end up with 4 wells up there, and you're going to need to treat for the H2S. The disinfection, whichever way we choose, is already going to be a requirement. So what we're learning is water on the mountain is very, very rare and very, very difficult. So this may be the one in the hand.
Well, and water quality reports look favorable to commingling this water in with Cascade wells 5 and 6. You're not going to have an additional sulfide input. It'll help reduce the sulfur that gets produced up to the homes up in Cascade.
Mark, this is Tom Reeves. I have a question. You were talking about treatment, but treatment for hydrogen sulfide with chlorine is a much lower level than treating for bacterial reasons. Is that not correct?
It depends on the demand, but I'm not sure, Tom. You'd have to look into the findings and the recommendations for the treatment.
Yeah, my only concern is we've run into problems when we use chlorine. We ran into that down in the meadow, that when people can taste it, they have a problem with that. So I get a little worried about using chlorine.
Well, you should be able to avoid that. But, I would expect, no more than a 0.5 milligram per liter type disinfection dose. And that, is not, you're not going to taste that or smell that in the water. I wouldn't be able to. I know that from other systems I've worked in. So, it's certainly a good point, but, and there's other ways of disinfecting it, and I'm not sure what DEQ requires with the treatment system other than that you do need to disinfect it. They require that whenever you treat water. So, and I believe it would apply in this case we're discussing. So, anyway, those are details for the people working on that treatment side to work out. And I'm not familiar with what's been proposed, that sort of stuff.
Jim, what kind of demand do we need up at Cascade to basically divide that system and have it be independent?
Well, we're working on that right now with Kelsey. Depending on how we split the system, we probably would not resplit it exactly the way it was before because of the fact we have potential to fix some other inherent problems we had at the time. The original Mountain Village, if you know where Cheyenne and Washakie are, their problem up there was low pressure because they're at the very upper end of the original system. And they had a lot of complaints of low pressure. So we have the benefit of being able to maybe put them on the Cascade side, which really opens up a lot of great opportunities to better serve both sides without, once again, bringing all the water back down. So we're identifying that load right now. The potential growth is almost all on the Cascade side, but the present growth is relatively low. So that is going to grow. The original Mountain Village, Brian could confirm this or correct me, is for the most part built out, the original Mountain Village. There may be some more stuff coming in there, but compared to Cascade, where there's a high percentage empty. So the growth is on that side. So being able to mix and match these wells now, maybe at some point in time, some of the, we switch or whatever, but it's actually kind of very difficult, but it's forming into a pretty good plan to be able to serve. And the goal is we've got, to have 2 well fields that can work simultaneously at the same time. Right now, my analogy is we have 2 cars in the garage, but we only have 1 set of keys to 1 car. And that's where we're at right now. But now if we can get 2 cars going in 2 directions, 2 pumping, it's going to solve a lot of problems. And the chlorine issue for treatment for what we're going to do is really, we're to the point now where, you got to realize over 90% of water systems in the world use chlorine. They use it for disinfection. I really don't believe it's going to be a point. And we have some real serious supply issues. Big Sky is going to continue to grow, but we need to focus on there.
One point I want to just bring up and dovetails into that well 6 up in the Montana Club. And it's a great site. That is where a lot of our growth is going up towards bottom Challenger, working our way up to the mid station of another lift. And that well, I just like to focus on that one a little, what the potential is given our future and that recent main extension that we brought into that phase 2.
And believe me, all these test wells, there's a lot of consideration for them. These wells, if they need treatment, right now, the area we're looking at is gathering this up, taking it to the Cascade booster, some sort of treatment. Probably what might unfold in the future based on the development you're saying is, that well has the biggest challenge for that well is the arsenic, right, to deal with that. But it is a good location for growth. But there's all distribution system in there to handle that growth too. Right. So
it's at the
point well taken, but yeah, it's a very complicated chess game with the geography up there and the area we're trying to serve and the elevations. It's no small task.
Where was test well 6, Jim? This is the
right there.
Montana Club. Trying to remember.
Right there, a little to the left. A little to the left. That lot right to the north, right there, right in there. Right there.
And there's water mains already in there now on them roads. All that's the new Montana Club that we've been working on. So the blue lines are incomplete on this particular slide.
It's a good one from a development perspective because it's utility track for us and parking, and it was actually a helipad site for emergency up there as well. It's starting to get too congested. So, just that was the only comment on it, that that's where our growth is going in our master plan right now. So as we go to the west or to the left of the screen, it'd be great to have a source that can grow into that.
Well, and that's part of this benefit of this overall well exploration is dealing with problems we have today and preparing for what's coming.
Back to the demand question, I saw Mace log into the meeting. Woodard Kern did an analysis for us when we did our big study on the Mountain Village water demands. And as I recall, Mace, I think you said 5% of the demand is actually the Cascade part of our system, and 90 or 95% is in the mountain core area.
Cascade can be misleading. You look at Cascade 2A and 2B, they're condo tracks. What's slowed the Mountain Village is we can't develop those surface parking lots.
Right.
We need surface parking.
I figured
It doesn't make sense to say, great, let's put a hotel there, but we have to build a $20 million parking deck. Doesn't pencil out the decks. So
the other
pushing to the west.
The other thing I recall in the Woodard Kern report was that we're spending $50,000 or $60,000 a year through pumping costs to all the way to the Cascade tank to satisfy less than 10% of the demand.
That maintenance and that ops of that has to be so inefficient.
It's extremely inefficient, and the biggest of a long list of reasons we don't want to do that. Nobody wanted to do it. The problem was the Cascade wells didn't turn out to be what they intended to be. The intention was two separate systems. It was a great design with the two separate systems. And if the Cascade wells would have done what they would hope to do, we would have been able to deliver 2 million gallons a day to the mountain.
Yeah.
Right now, we can deliver about 700,000.
You tied into the meadow back when the Cascade system was designed, you weren't tied into the meadow.
Yeah.
That was a big part of this too.
So this is a really good plan, and you know, one of the things we're discussing, I've been an advocate of, and I'm trying to, you know, I'm using Kelsey and Scott and the engineers as value engineering. What makes sense to me is our biggest customer on the mountain is the Yellowstone Club. We've got an agreement with them, 125 Yellowstone. So we may switch some of the loads. I made the example of Washakie and Cheyenne. The Yellowstone Club, if we could put them on that upper system demand, the only reason to do it is just to try to balance the loads between them. So you don't have, you know, very little demand, but a lot of wells sitting idle on one side and some other wells on the other side that are working all the time. So we're definitely working through all those equations. And if we can get a supply of water, we can make the system a lot more efficient. And it's not just a matter of finding water, it's being able to get it to where it needs to go efficiently. It doesn't matter if you have 2,000 gallons a minute of well water if you can only deliver 300. And that's kind of the way we're sitting right now.
So that kind of brings us back to the location or getting the water to the right point. We've been kind of kicking that Cascade tank well down the line until we got more data from these other wells. So given that, this well number 8, potentially 5 and 6, do we still have demand in Cascade to continue to look at exploring that well?
Well, I've talked to Mark. He doesn't like that well very much, so. But it sure would be
He
convenient.
doesn't like black holes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I forget which test well number that was, but we did drill a well up near the tank here. The reason
That's well one. Yeah.
out of convenience, obviously, it's right next to the storage.
Pumping costs.
I don't know if you want to comment on that well, test well, Mark.
Well, the strike against that one is it's about a $500,000 drilling project to finish that. That well, that site we also targeted, you know, we actually just targeted water, but we ended up drilling through the intrusive rock. So that became the de facto target. And we drilled that well to about 882 feet. I would have to look, but it's right in there somewhere. And so to get, you know, we did not have water production. So to further test that site, you know, you'd want to plan a well down into the Kootenai. Now you're talking 1,700 feet. You're needing to bring drillers in from somewhere else. You're not going to have a local driller drive up and drill that one. And even if you did, the costs still go up, and you've got to drill it with the mud rotary method. Everything we've been doing on this project has been air rotary, and that, of course, was quite intentional to drill a bunch of sites where we could check for water with the most cost-effective drilling method. But so, you know, so it's hard to, so the $500,000 plus or minus price tag on that well is not very appealing when you consider that you might end up back in this bounded flow system with, you know, similar capacity, you know, to what we've seen, which is, you know, 100 gallon a minute, a smaller amount, you know, of acre feet. You know, so that I didn't recommend we pursue that because of that potential outcome. You know, that said, you know, well, that's where I'll leave it. You can always spend the money and try, but you're going to end up dropping $500,000 before you've determined what kind of, you know, to determine what kind of production you have at that location.
What's the projected depth of the Madison there?
It was like 3,000.
So if we're looking at $50,000 a year pumping costs, just in pumping costs, then we're looking at O&M on piping systems, high pressure, pressure reducing systems. You know, does that bring that more into play? Potentially having a treatment system for wells 5 and 6 to get some better water up there.
If it was guaranteed.
Sure. Well, then we would just do it. Right.
Peter's a gambler, and I really appreciate it.
No, I'm just.
I would like, that would be my number one choice too.
That's the
Mark
location.
is, you know, because I've had the same conversation with Mark, egging him on, but, you know, it's like horse betting, and you've got to take in all the consideration. Mark doesn't think it's a very good bet, so.
I mean, Mark, is there any other kind of analysis that you could do to look at what our chances are up there?
Well, not without a lot of uncertainty. So yeah, I you know, and as far as like, just to touch on the Madison, with the information we have, there's no reason to not expect the Madison to also have a bounded response and possibly low capacity, or likely low capacity. So, yeah, I just don't see that as something I'd want to guide you folks into. You know, you could, it's iffy. I think you could, you know, it's doubtful to me you'll hit a home run with that, you know, and when you spend that kind of money, that's what you want to get. And the other aspect of the Madison is you know, you want to acid stimulate those wells, and that actually gives you a little chance to get more production, and it's very effective in that formation. But the logistics and difficulty of that project would drive the price up of that well. You know, it probably costs double or more what you would pay at a site that's more amenable to not only the drilling operation, but all the disposal you have. Because when you acid stimulate, you've got to develop all that fluid out of the well and haul it away. And, you know, we're talking 3-4 trucks, 24/7 for a week, you know, to do that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it's a big project, and with that kind of an uncertain outcome. You know, I identified a Madison well site down in that andesite anticline back in the report I did in 2009, you know, because that's your shortest depth to the Madison there, down at that location. But even that is a difficult area. And you know, just to take on a project like that and this kind of terrain, certainly it can be done, but you've got to really want to do it. That's for sure. Because it's going to be, you know, logistically difficult. I don't know if that answered any of your question. I kind of rambled on there, but my general impression is I think it's very risky to sink that kind of money into a project at that location.
Quick question, maybe tied to it, because we're talking about rehabbing wells 5 and 6 and how we're tying in. We have issues there. We started snowmaking last week, miraculously, at 20 degrees, I think. What are wells 5 and 6? But not right now, just because we have to start recharging that.
So wells 5 and 6 are the initial wells we started learning about this boundless, where you drill a well and you get all kinds of water out initially, and they drop off. So wells 5 and 6 are the poster child for that. When we run 5 and 6, we're going to be able to run them at somewhere between 30 and 60 gallons.
Yeah, we were thinking that.
So
they're opened up right now.
Yeah, because of the agreement. 35 gallons. Yeah, I mean, it's really, in light of what we've learned in the last 10 years, it's not going to be a solution for snowmaking, and it's certainly, you know.
What's not, we can't I started to say it earlier, firing those pumps, when we put brand new pumps in about 5 years ago, those are exceeding or stripping out.
They are, so it's not a good situation, and really looking now at the desperation we're getting for drinking water and what we're faced at, to be dumping what little drinking water we have out there in the creek right now is probably not what we should be doing. So we really need to come up, and I think long term, the snowmaking will probably end up being treated effluent or whatever. It's just the timing of these things. So what seemed like a good idea 10 years ago, now we know how difficult water up here. So probably something we should revisit.
What about the target GPM for a rehab on those?
Well, Mark had to speak to that, but it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of potential to go deeper and get much different because, unfortunately,
Those weren't deep wells to begin with.
No, a couple hundred feet.
I mean, in the big picture.
But even like all the original mountain wells, 1, 2, they're only around, some of them 80 feet, some 100. So deep wells haven't been our success story up there to begin with.
Yeah, these wells down along the tributary at Lake Levinsky are alluvial wells. Everything else are confined aquifer bedrock wells.
And even those wells, well, 1 is over 200, but most of them, well, 2 is 75, well, 3 is 80 gallons a minute. They're not super big producers. So to have a collection of smaller wells to get your total volume is kind of what we've been doing. Unfortunately, we haven't hit any of these Belgrade, Montana, 1,000-gallon minute wells.
The advantage to those all being shallow wells is the pumping cost to pump out of those shallow wells is a lot less than, say, a 3,000 foot deep well.
But generally, the water quality is a lot better. So have less iron, manganese, versus all that good stuff. So I guess one of the questions I'm kind of hearing is how much water do we need to satisfy Cascade short-term, currently, and then long-term full build-out?
Well, I wish I had an easy answer for you right now. We're working on that. All that writing on the board with Kelsey yesterday, we're trying to come to that conclusion and figure out, well, now that we're getting closer to learning what we have or what we don't have, what's the best way to efficiently divide it between the obligations of the original Mountain Village. Remember, Lone Moose and Aspen Grove both had wells that went south, and they are basically drawing off the Mountain Village too, and that's where Mark spoke of earlier. If we could reduce that requirement and buy something in the Thunder Wolf area or something, that helps the Mountain Village. So with the original Mountain Village has been asked to do an awful lot from what it was really intended. That's what we're trying to do. So.
Well, and with the new metering platform, we could easily look at per household demand for what's there. I think all the development that's left is single family residential in Cascade.
Things like Cascade Ridge or.
We know what that's going to look like. But we could look at that and get you more information.
Kelsey's
on
been asking
current demand that
We had estimated this for one of Taylor's presentation. It was like 65% built out. Cascade. That's a little misleading. Looking up at it doesn't look it, but it's over 50% built out.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's good news to the water guys.
It's look at it when you zone in on it. It's over 50. We actually sat there and went.
Are you talking sold from Boyne or?
No,
construction?
Boyne's 100% sold out.
But constructed buildings.
And we're talking about construction, but I think that reflects it right there.
I bet there's another 20 more houses since that was
But this is a great exercise asking that. What is the demand? I think you can be able to tell. It used to be, the covenants used to say you have to have a minimum of 1,500 square feet. You have some 6,000 square footage out there. And you have a whole lot of SDR, short-term rentals going in there. You're going to see that curve go up per SFE on some of those with short-term rentals.
All these things are being considered. If you remember from the last meeting, we're working towards a 30% design in anticipation of getting some of the ARPA money or whatever you call it there. So we're working on this exact drill now, and that's when Kelsey, the 82S ask is to identify exactly what that load is. So we'll probably know it here next year.
Well, the Thunderwolf well, do you think that'll be a test well next summer?
Now that we know what we know from the last 2 summers of testing wells and striking out in the areas we have, I would absolutely recommend it and talk with Mark about it yesterday because now the goal, one way to relieve the pressure on the mountain may be to help Lone Moose and Aspen Grove stand on their own 2 feet. That would be a big benefit here.
100, 200 gallon man well there would keep us in shape for a long time for those developments.
600 gallon a minute would even be better.
Didn't Spanish Peaks do some testing?
Not sure.
Well, it's very close to what the Flatiron people have presented and all that. We Mark identified that as a potential well site a long time ago, but at the time we're thinking, yeah, but we can't really bring that water back up on the mountain without 600 PSI challenge, huge. But now, as things unfold and Aspen Grove and Lone Moose are a burden on the mountain
So
system.
you're reconfiguring the system basically to accommodate the source. John Olson, are you on the call?
He logged in earlier.
I think test wells were done there, almost positive. You can look at that data if you don't have it.
We'll answer that.
Oh, I think he's off.
Mark, did you hear the question?
No, if you could repeat that, please.
Well, I think you flagged it in the 09 source capacity plan that there were some test holes that were drilled.
They're right above the arrow is. That little 2-track. I think it's something that we should just finalize once and for all. I've brought it up a couple times. I just never could confirm it.
We fully intend to explore that.
Yeah. You can see that 2-track that used to come in off of Lodi right there. You see that right? Just down the road. There you go. That's been blocked on the other end, but
Do you think there's some wells in there?
I think there's a test well in there, but
Do you recall, Mark, a test well?
I don't know.
I thought Spanish Peaks was in there.
It rings a bell.
Well, of course, they drilled the ones across the road.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a good one to look into.
We're on it.
Jim Musket, this is Tom Raves. Do you have the numbers on what Aspen Groves and Hidden Village demand for water?
We do just on here.
Yes, if you look at your flow sheet in the report and you look at the amount of water leaving Lone Moose Fault, that is 100% Aspen Grove consumption. Hidden Village right now is supplied by the meadow system. So Aspen Grove is on the mountain, Lone Moose is being supplied by the mountain with a small contribution from the original Lone Moose well. It's very small, but primarily the mountain. So,
There's your mountain transmission.
your mountain transmission flow coming down, that's that 131,000. Right now, we are running all of Lone Moose on the one well that is operating because the demand is incredibly low up there. So you had originally 2 wells that were, Mark, correct me, were they 100 gallons a minute apiece or 200 gallons a minute apiece, but they all played out. Now we can get about 17 gallons a minute out of one well. With a very limited amount of demand in Lone Moose, especially this time of year, we can actually supply that with that little well. The remaining of that balance of water is going down the hill to Aspen Grove. So with the virtual meter system and that number there, we can tell you exactly what Aspen Grove has been using. And
Like 3.5 million gallons a year.
well, you got to factor in there's fire storage requirements and things like that. But so the possibility of finding them, hopefully we can find a well in that Lone Moose area that takes care of those 2 entities and their demand. And once again, the water that we've been bringing down off the mountain towards Lone Moose, that number will go back to 0 and we can save that water on the mountain village. That's the strategy.
So I've got another question for Mark regarding well 8. Obviously, that was a pretty significant success as far as water quality and location are concerned. Are there any other locations nearby where we could get into that same water?
Well, you could, but you might find you're interconnected. Because you would have to stay in that same structural trend. And, what we've just seen is we have strong interconnection almost 2,000 feet away, in that trend. So,
Move east to west on that.
yeah, east to west is a no, because, we've pretty much looked at that. And, the rocks are dipping on the west side, they're dipping west, and on the east, they're dipping east. And so you end up with deeper drill depths, and that's where we were targeting that intrusive rock, because getting to the deeper formations was going to require, in probably the mud rotary drilling method, more expensive test wells.
So you would move north-south along the anticline then?
That's where I think you're going to be connected. So I haven't really looked at that. The one spot you could look at, and is to the south. And I could give that a look. I really haven't looked at it, but you'd need to get a couple thousand feet away from that location. So you probably heading up the mountain at that point. So I'd say it's unlikely, but I could look at that.
Yeah, it just seems like a positive result to pursue.
Which well are you talking about?
8.
Okay.
Well, and well 6 is sort of doing that. We test well 6 in that utility lot is sort of in that ballpark. Test well 5, which is by the tank, the Mountain Village tank, that also could do that, and I've just, but they're both going to be more expensive wells. You will be into that bounded system. It's certainly, I would expect you to be in the bounded system, but it's something you could consider, in the future. Yeah, well 5 is, I'm sorry, test well 5, I'm looking at my GIS, is basically dead on the trend. It's probably fall between test wells 7 and 8. It's about, let's see, it's 2,300 feet from well 8. You could drill a well there, but you are going to be, we drilled that well, that test well 5. I'd have to look, but it's as deep as was reasonable to go, and we're just touching into the top of the Thermopolis. So you've got 800 more feet of drilling. So it's going to put you into that more expensive well scenario. So the strikes against it are the same as up at the Cascade tank, but it could be, something that's looked at, if the district's, has to move in that direction.
Mark, didn't we at one point explore that there was that pullout that was off the spur road? It was basically the anticline itself.
That was test well 2. We went up on the uphill side, but we went up. And that's the well that he was referring to that had the connectivity to these.
Yeah.
If we could move this out and show you all the test wells.
Oh, yeah.
He's already got
Yep,
the
I see
points there.
too. Yeah.
And
And that one had a real strong initial response, but then ended up being bounded. Is there any possibility that ended up on the other side of the anticline, and that was why it was bounded?
No, it's dead center on the anticline, that test well 2, if that's what we're talking about there. So yeah, it's just in it. Well 7 is here, test well 7 appears to be just on the west side, if not right on the hinge. Well 8, test well 8 is a little bit on the east side of the anticline. So 5 would be a little bit on the east side also. 6 would be on, test well 6 would be on the west side. Sorry, that was test well 5 I'm referring to, up by the Mountain Village tank. And both test wells 5 and 6, you're going to be into that $500,000 price tag range for wells at that location, at those, Kootenai wells that go down through at that location. And when you drill those and you're drilling mud rotary, you're not going to have the luxury to stop at the top of the Kootenai. You could, you got to be quite deliberate. It's going to be more money to do that, but you can't look at what you're getting as nearly as easily as you can with air, particularly when it comes to water quality. So you're pretty much going to drill those to total depth and then purge the mud out of the well, start development, and then start pump testing, and that's when you finally see what you got. So answer your question, there's some spots to the south you want to get pretty far away, and you still might have that connection issue. Not to say you couldn't develop them, but, and you'd have more information. Presumably this happens in a few more years or some years after well 8's been in operation. The district collects more water level data from well 7, test well 7 and test well 2. That would put you in a better position to make that decision.
So I guess we'd love to get that DPS on well 8. First step.
Well, based on everything I've seen, and I think Jim would agree, we need to keep moving forward with making this part of our public water system. We've got to flesh out some demand issues. It sounds like you're still working on that, Kelsey, with Jim.
Yeah, current demand. The Woodard and Kern CIP report has a demand of the Cascade, including Cascade subdivision, Powder Ridge, and Montana Club of about 520,000 gallons per day. So that, with the 125 gallons per minute for Yellowstone Club, is about 475 gallons per minute build out. So
the Woodard Kern report was 2015, I believe.
Yep.
And so
January 2016, so basically.
And a lot of development's taken place since then, so we need to update that.
And it's important to understand that the demand she's referring to would be the full build out. That number is more than what we can produce for everything.
Right. Yeah.
We've got some catching up to do.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news is it's encouraging.
Yeah.
What we're seeing today gives us some direction that we need to pursue.
I think the option on off park, if you do get into something over there, that's great to take the pressure off the mountain.
Well,
That's going to grow the homes.
and farther down the line, there's going to be more demand needed here. We're sitting good in the meadow currently, when you start looking at decades, but in the end, finding a lot of water partway down next to a water main that you have coming downhill is good. So there's definitely a good justification for looking for the immediate problem solving and for future.
Well, and the work you guys did in Hill Condos, replacing all those interior mains, has realized about, what would you say, 80 to 100 gallons a minute of savings?
Yeah, probably more like 50 to 80. But
He's always a little lower than I am.
I like to tell you more, but and the lesson there is we have a water system that was built in early 70s. It's been added on. We have a very unusual, very challenging water system. So to say we're going to fix all our leaks, and only, the demand that Kelsey's asking for is what's people are using. We meter, we know what they're using. There's also water we lose before it ever gets to. Right? And the numbers that we have to design to are what comes out of the well. That includes that number we're using. We constantly stay on top of that, trying to keep it in check. But reality is what we got to shoot for, what we need to target for, is all of that volume. So do we stay on, leak detection is definitely an integral part of maintenance. But we have no choice. We need to make the system more efficient, find more water, and use it wisely.
That big hit you had over the golf course on number 5. I mean, it's bathrooms, things like that.
Oh yeah, and
Huge numbers.
It's a death by 1,000 cuts, leak detection. Little tiny things that people call us. Arlene could tell you, people call every day, can't believe their water use, and she'll refer to a toilet leak, which could be a half to 3/4 gallons a minute a day, and they just basically don't understand how that could affect it. But when you do the math and realize it's 1,440 minutes in a day, these little leaks multiplied by hundreds add up tremendously.
Ron, this is Tom Reeves. Do we have enough information to move forward on our plan for the mountain water system?
I think we do. We've got to look at some demand stuff that Kelsey and Jim are working on. We've got some deviation issues, it sounds like, with DEQ. Based on what Mark said, the well that's drilled there can work, so we don't have to re-drill a public water well, so we could start some paperwork on the deviations.
We need to open discussion with Boyne on using that piece of land and that well and what will be there. That's probably working.
So a number of details to flesh out, but we do have a path moving forward.
I agree.
All right. I think that's the first part of your presentation, Mark, and now we're going on to Flatiron well evaluation.
Yeah, and Ron, you've got that.
Yeah,
I've got a few other slides for that one.
I've got the other one here, Mark.
Yeah. Okay. So, so this is Middle Fork Properties, I guess, approached the district months ago about integrating their existing wells on that property into the water system. And so what I did, we can go to the next slide, please, Ron. Looked at the wells, construction, they had run some pumping tests, we have water quality. The water rights, as I note there, they have none that I know of. I'm not sure if that's completely accurate, but that's the information I have right now. So we can go to the next one. So here's the wells, and I call them, they call them Middle Fork Meadow number 1, number 2, and number 3. And so that's what the MFM is for. Only number 1 and number 2 were built. These were drilled in October 2008, maybe into November. Number 3 was started and then terminated. This was the prior landowner stopped drilling in relation to the start of the recession. That was, if you recall, October 2008. I guess things were going south then. So that well never got built, and it's probably not usable. So I'm only looking at number 1 and number 2. And yeah, I go over this geology a little. So what this picture is showing is I've overlaid the geology onto the air photo, and then I've just made the geology transparent so you can see the trees, so you can You can see that Thunderwolf chairlift right next to MFM number 3, a little bit southwest from it. And if you go due west from that chairlift, you'll see I've got Kootenai in parentheses next to the symbol KK. That's the geology map symbol. So that kind of mauve colored rock is the Kootenai, and that is in the Andesite Mountain anticline. And that magenta line just to the west of where it says Kootenai, KK paren, Kootenai paren, that's actually the hinge line of that fold. And that area with that symbol, it's kind of a JTRMD, where there's no geology color there. That's a deeper formation in the core of the anticline fold. So these wells are all on the east side of that fold. And this is where I was mentioning, you could drill other places. There's a fair amount of area there. As you get towards that hinge line, you're not going to drill into Kootenai anymore. You're going to go into Morrison, and that's not a target for us. So you've got to stay either to the east or to the west, west being more developed and less available, to get to where you can drill down into the Kootenai. And that's why if you drilled, say, down into the, in that chairlift area, you're going to go through Thermopolis and then down into the Kootenai. And that's what that MFM well number 2 does. Whereas MFM number 1, by the little pond there, there's all a bunch of glacial till runs down that Middle Fork Valley. So they first go through till in that well, and then that well goes straight into Kootenai, approximately. So that's kind of how the geology lays out. And from a perspective of just developing wells that can produce water, this is a good location because you've got the producing formation exposed below the till, right in the area of the Middle Fork Channel. Now, that does have a implication for water right permitting, and I'll go over that. But that's the idea behind this site is you can, you've got the Kootenai formation exposed to the till, which is exposed to the channel, so you've got a good recharge pathway. And just as an aside, since we've got this anticline structure up here, this is in Mountain Village. This is probably, to drill a Madison well, you'd want to get into that hinge area, which is kind of challenging. This would be the shallowest depth to the Madison that I believe exists in that whole mountain area. So if you could, carve out a site that you could drill to, this would be drill to the Madison, this would be, your spot. If it was a flat earth there, you could just drive up in a field and drill, that would be a nice spot for a Madison test well.
How deep do you think it is in there, Mark, Madison?
I'd have to look, but you're generally a couple thousand feet below the Kootenai to the Madison. So, we've got Morrison showing up right there. So you'd be in that, but you can't just stop once you tag the top of formation. So you'd still be in that, maybe 1,700, 2,500, 1,700 to the top, but you might be building a 2,500 foot deep well, to get into it. I did estimate that back in I estimated that drill depth back in the 2009 source capacity plan. But anyway, so that's a little aside. We can go on to the next one. So here are the well constructions, and they did get approval for these from DEQ, and of course, there's no reason you wouldn't get approved. They're both good constructions with deep casing seals, and they're both artesian wells. MFM number 1 is the one on the left, and number 2 is on the right there. So the shut-in pressure, you have to have shut these wells in at the surface, or otherwise they'll flow continuously, but they come to a pressure of about 22, 23 PSI, at location. So that's something you got to consider to complete them, but certainly not a problem. But they built these, they drilled 16-inch holes down to some depth, and number 1 down 45 feet. And then they set and cemented 12-inch casing into that. That already meets the sealing requirements for DEQ. But then they went ahead and drilled 12-inch out that casing all the way down to, in the case of the number 1 well, 200 feet. And then they set and cemented 8-inch casing into that. And then they put in a liner screen, which I expect was just lowered down and dropped in place. They had drilled they drill an 8-inch borehole out the bottom of the 12, and then out the bottom of the 8-inch casing, and then they lower this screen down in. And that's the way both the wells are built. And when they pump test them, there's virtually no hydraulic connection between them. So, they pump test number 1 and they don't see any effect in number 2, and it's reciprocal. So vice versa. So they're sealing out, the producing zones are sealed out from one another. So they're actually 2 independent completions. I guess I do have a little note. I expect if these were to come into the system, that approval by DEQ is back in 08. Who knows? It probably didn't get ever followed up with on as-builts. I expect there'd be some sort of resubmittal to get approval for the wells again. But anyway, that's well down the road. We can go to the next one, Ron. So in the number 1 well, they did a 74-hour pumping test, constant rate. They did not do a step rate test, which is not, essential, but it's something I always use. It gives you have better ability to estimate your yield with that. They didn't measure the flow with computer logging equipment, which that also is in the same category. I mean, that's the way we used to do it 20 years ago. And these tests were just run in 2019, by the way. So these are not tests. These were tests by the present landowner, not tests by the original landowner that drilled the wells. But this well ran at 315 GPM was the test rate. So I did a hydraulic analysis of the data. I'll go over that quickly here in a minute. And I estimated this well at 240 gallon a minute, 161 acre feet per year. And I'm using the exact same criteria as I did on test well 8 that we just discussed. I do think there's some flow limiting response in the data I'll go over. One of the big issues or significant issues in this is both iron and manganese exceed the secondary standards. So you don't have to treat that water, but you guys might feel you do. They're non-enforceable standards. It's a fixture staining issue. Certainly, both iron and manganese, when exposed to oxygen, will precipitate. And so there is that issue with this well in particular. And as I'll mention, it's less to a much lesser degree in the number 2 well. So we can go on to the next one, Ron. Okay, so this is still the number 1 well, and these are my hydraulic analysis plots, similar to what I've been showing you for others. And this is kind of illustrative if you look at this plot in the upper left of what I've been talking to you about, how I look at the slope of that drawdown and am able to see if there's a bounded response. And so if you look at the upper points on that plot, the little circles, that's the drawdown. And the points that are the little crosses, that's the slope of the drawdown, okay? And so what you see in that is, see how those slope points go horizontal after about 1,000 minutes? So this was a test that it ran for 4,320 minutes approximately. So the last 3,000 minutes of this, you got that horizontal slope. Well, that's, constant slope. And that's why those points are horizontal. So that's what we're not seeing in the test wells that we've drilled up in Mountain Village. And what that indicates is you've got a aquifer of sufficient extent that we're just seeing radial flow to the well. We're not seeing a bounded response in that. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between the test wells and this well. So this is a preferable response right here. And then that plot on the right, upper right, I'm able to get a more confident estimate of aquifer transmissivity, which is just kind of interesting. It's neither here nor there on how much water that well will produce. Certainly higher transmissivity is more water. And it's about 500 feet square per day. Not strikingly high, but not atypical for bedrock formations. And then the plot on the lower left, that's the recovery phase data. And the way that is trending back towards 0 residual drawdown. So this is, you got to look at this plot backwards. When the pump was shut off, you start to get the points that plot on the far right of that. And then as recovery time proceeds, the points track to the left. Well, that shape is indicating there's some sort of flow limitation on this well response, whether it's fracture termination or whatever the feature is. Not able to identify that, but that approach back to 0 residual is indicating some flow limitation. And so nevertheless, or as I done for any of these tests, I fit a model to those test data, and that's what's shown in the lower right. Okay, and then I use that model to estimate the design rate and annual volume. And that I used the 180 days continuous pumping and the 5-year continuous pumping for the volume, just as I did on test well 7, test well 8, test well 2. And that's where I come up with the yield estimate, the 240 GPM design rate, and the 161 acre feet. So, I mean, it's certain, and you could run a longer test, look at this some more, but that's a fair estimate of what this well could achieve. As far as DEQ is concerned, they would actually approve this well for the 315, because they're 72 hours at the design rate qualifies for that. I just think in long-term use, you might find that doesn't hold up, and you would have to run it at a lower rate, and you would also be, you wouldn't be able to run it at 240 GPM 24/7 for a year. You'd exceed my volume. That's something you'd learn with operations, but it would be an intermittent rate to achieve that 161 acre feet. But we can go to the next one, Ron. So number 2, they ran that for 49 hours. The generator quit in that test, and probably, I don't know what time of day it was, but no one was out there, and not that was not inappropriate. I mean, if I was running it, I probably wouldn't be out there either. But anyway, it being an artesian well, it recovered, but it just started to flow. So, because what they need to do in this test is run it, shut the pump down, and shut in the well. And so no one was there to do that. So we don't have the recovery phase data on this well. For what I'm doing, in this analysis, I didn't see that as a big deal. They tested it 201 gallon a minute, so call it 200. And my analysis, they didn't test it, but my analysis was you could safely run this well at 250. And you from what we see in this test data, you could run that well at 250 24/7, day in, day out. Based on this particular test, DQ would limit it to 1.5, 2/3 of the test rate. So that's where the 134 comes in. But this test was a constant pressure well response, which I'll show you. Most likely related to, could be related to recharge from the Middle Fork channel. The iron and manganese was lower. And neither well had the arsenic in it, by the way. So the iron was below the secondary standard. The manganese was just marginally above it. Didn't run any geochemistry modeling on this, but that type of scenario, sure, if you're, a transient homeowner, you'd probably see some precipitate in like your toilet bowls and tanks, but you might not get that. Manganese is a little recalcitrant to precipitate. It doesn't jump out of the water like iron does when it gets exposed to oxygen. So normal use, you might not see any precip out of that. The one caveat is it can change, right, with use. So, you might see those numbers change a little with continued use of this well, but don't know. For now, we don't know that. You can go to the next one, Ron. Okay, so here's the analysis plots for this, and I'm hoping you'll all be experts on hydraulic analysis when I'm done with all these. But anyway, here's another one. That upper left plot, and this is telling of a well's production potential. You can see again, the circles are the drawdown data, and you can see how they just flatten out there after 1,000 minutes. And you can also see that the crosses, which are the slope of that line, they continue with a downward trend and ultimately just bottom out at a noisy value of 0. Okay. And actually the early time of that test, in around 10 minutes to 30, 40 minutes, we actually see a constant slope. It's a good radial flow response. The plot on the upper right, now you can see where the drawdown points are the circles again. Those fall below that line and go flat line. Well, that's a fully stabilized drawdown. So that drawdown's become invariant to time. And that's a well that is getting a source of recharge that is equal to or greater than the pumping rate of that well. Okay. And so I fit a model to it. That's the lower right. And in this case, I'm having to fit a constant pressure boundary to it. And so I fit that model and didn't do a lot of projection. The way I analyzed this well was, okay, you tested 200. I'm only going to recommend it for 25% above the test rate. Well, that's my 250 GPM. That ends up with the model being about 190 feet of drawdown. Well, the first 50 feet of drawdown comes from the artesian head. So you're about 140 feet below ground on a pumping level. And then, it doesn't matter how long you run it, at least in terms of the model and the data we have, that drawdown is pegged at that level. So 24/7 full-time run is the estimate on the volume. That's where I come up with the 400 acre feet. So
You think that's why they shortened the test to 49 hours? Instead
the
of
generator failed.
So that was the sole reason.
I believe that's the case. Yeah. Yeah. And they didn't I don't think, they didn't repeat it. Yeah. Okay. And I did in my memo recommend, we'll go over that. I'll get there. So we can go to the next one, Ron. So, of course, the first step in doing anything on these wells is establish terms for any, to see if there's a viable transfer option for the district. I mean, my conclusion is both wells could be used. Well, one would need, like you may likely need to treat that water. But so if you could come to satisfactory terms and you did want to proceed with it, you have to start from scratch, planning your project and costs, et cetera. Water rights, I've outlined in the source capacity plan 09 and in 2015. You could add diversions onto your existing rights. In fact, that's the strategy for test well 8. You've got plenty of volume. I haven't updated it since 2015, but back then, the water rights were going to have sufficient volume for the district out to like 2035. So these wells would fit on that. The thing you might have to apply for is new beneficial use. Now you can do that. That's how you have to add rate in Montana. You can't add rate, through changes. You have to do it through a new application, but you would not be applying for any volume. So the adverse effects to surface water is not in play when you permit that way. The one catch to the water right is, that constant pressure boundary is probably attributed to the surface water. Well, that might give DNRC some heartache on approving the change where you add these onto rights. So, I discuss in that memo that, you'd want to go into a pre-application meeting with DNRC and iron all this out. And what you might come out of that with is that, so you need to put a monitoring well, in some place where you could potentially measure if there was actually a drawdown effect at the channel related to these wells. They might want something like that, and and retesting. So, that's what could come out of that. So it's given that proximity to the channel, there's an issue that the water right permitting would not be as straightforward as, for example, well 8, test well 8 that we're just talking about. It's not going to be, I don't believe you're going to see any issues with DNRC about a surface water effect. Additional water quality data would certainly be useful, anytime you're contemplating treatment. You'd want to collect that. And I just threw in there, given that the district was not in charge of construction, they look like very good constructions. Running a video camera down the wells might not be a bad idea either. So, if you got terms that were satisfactory, you'd kind of condition them on, going through these other steps, but rather than spend any money on these steps now, you you first need to establish those terms. So that completes what I have on these wells.
Mark, this is Tom Reeves. I have a couple of questions. The first question is that we have in our system the Lone Moose well that I think when it came on stream, it was a high producing well and now has become to, I think one is not used at all and the other one is 17 gallons a minute. What is the likelihood that these wells could have the same fate? And secondly, those potential well site up in Thunderwolf on Boeing property, what is the likelihood that they could get into the same kind of production area that well 2 or well 1 are producing?
Well, the answer to the Lone Moose is no, we don't see at all the same response to pumping. So Lone Moose wells had a very bounded response. And we just, we're not seeing that in either of these wells. So doubtful they would ever end up like Lone Moose. Could you drill into similar stuff and develop similar water? I think very good chance of that. You'd have to drill the well to see, but you would anticipate you'd get similar production, water quality from a well in that area. They're literally 400 or so feet apart on the same structure, drilling into the same geology. So that's the basis for that.
I think this Flatiron went to the Zoning Advisory Committee for their PUD and were shot down 5-0. And I don't know what happened at the regular zoning meeting, what the outcome was on that. And I think Steve Johnson's in the audience and he would likely know. But any negotiation with them, I don't think makes sense right now.
So it went to the P&Z and was continued. And there is a special meeting scheduled for the Planning and Zoning Commission in Bozeman on December 10th. They've set aside a whole day for this on December 10th. So, and to our knowledge, there is no change at all to the application that we saw at the advisory committee level. And I think the reason for scheduling a whole day is there was just a huge amount of public comment in opposition to this. And so they're planning on seeing the same thing happen in Bozeman.
Sounds like they have some big hurdles.
Stand by for further updates.
Well, I think the other piece of data that in their presentation to us is that the production of these 2 wells would eventually only supply their development and wouldn't provide any excess capacity for the current district.
That may be possible, Tom. I think just from our perspective on the water, the merits of their development, I won't speak to that. It has nothing to do with us. What they're asking us is if there is value to the district because the known current situation we've been talking about, needing more water on the mountain in these wells. And, they're obviously looking to trade some increased sewer capacity because that's their stumbling block for their development. And that's all fine. And I won't speak to that. This is not my area, but from looking at from a water point of view, it's important for the board members to understand that whatever is here, whatever quantity ends up being here is probably not going to be useful to us in the mountain because the monumental task of getting it to go backwards uphill puts us right back in the same boat we're trying to get out of on a cascade, bringing water from far away. There's You know, there's known commodities of water in lots of faraway places, but you have to get it close. Where there is value in this area is what we had discussed before, using that water, using some water in this area for lone, moose, and aspen growth. Whether it's worth trading a warehouse full of SFEs or just finding our own is the question that's kind of posed here. So we asked Mark to evaluate from our perspective what the value of these wells is. It's slightly less, you know, than what they had initially advertised. You spoke, Tom, to one point. The mammoth size of their demand may make a moot point if these wells did do what they're saying, and if they need all that water, then obviously there's no value left to us. But I'm not commenting one way or the other, but it's important to understand why we're talking about these wells, and that is they have thrown an offer on the table that we're trying to quantify.
This is Bill Shropshire. Isn't it? This is a very, very interesting presentation on geology and hydrology, but I think that the more interesting question is what is the ultimate decisions that are going to have to come out of this thing. I mean, if it's $700,000 per well and it's like any mining venture, you don't know whether or not you're going to have a dry hole or if you're going to hit gold. Where are we? I mean, at what rate? I mean, we've calculated the rate on which we run out of SFEs on the waste side. What's the similar analysis that needs to be made on the water side? When are we going to be in deep mud about not being able to supply water?
So that's been looked at in the source capacity plans. So the last update was 2015, but there's demand timelines. You know, of course, we start out in that estimating growth rate. And there's demand timelines, you know, for wells, we look at maximum day demand. That's what determines your well capacity requirements. And I also looked at the water rights. And there's a timeline that shows, you know, in that particular plan, I believe I estimated about 125 gallons per minute per well for planning purposes. And you just go through that demand timeline and you determine when you need to add wells. So I'd have to go back through that report, but that information is in there. And it's close to where it's been 6 years now, given the type of growth that the district experiences in Gallatin County. This part of Madison County in general, wouldn't be a bad idea to update that and see if those numbers have changed since 2015. But it is laid out in there.
Well, and I think the difference between the sewer side and the water side is if you have money, you can always build more sewer treatment. With water, you can't necessarily find more water whenever you want. Even if you spend $700,000 a well, if the water's not there, it's not there.
You got it.
So I'm looking at a plot out of that 2015 plan, and
I just pulled it up, Mark.
oh, okay. So if you go to like page 8, text page 8, and it's been a little while since I've looked at this.
This is text page 6.
Yeah, so go down to it'll be figure 6 and 7. There's 2 plots on a page if you scroll on down.
I've got figure 6.
I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing that. Go. Oh, yeah. So it's the not the. It'd be PDF page 13, Ron. So go down just a couple. There you go. So that one. Now, if you can scroll down on that one to the lower, so we can see the lower graph on that same page.
Well, there's figure 8. Which figure do you need?
7. It's the one your cursor's on. Yeah.
There's figure 7.
Okay, I'm still seeing figure 8 on mine.
You got a little delay, I've noticed.
Oh, okay. No, you've got to get up to PDF page 13, so one above you.
He's still alive.
There you go. There you go. Okay.
Speed of light.
So what this is showing is supply deficit. Okay, well, a negative deficit is a surplus. Okay, so you basically are, and the meadow is the solid line, the dashed line is the mountain. So you're basically, and the time scale is across the bottom. And so at least in 2015 was estimating that basically a couple months ago, you went from having a surplus to a deficit. So you're basically right in there. I would have to read through the report. That the way we do wells is max day demand with your largest well out of service. Okay. I'd have to look at this and see if this is factoring that in, or if this is just saying actual demand versus capacity. So, but anyway, you're right in there. In Mountain Village, you're right in there in terms of this projected demand as needing to bring more capacity online.
Well, to your earlier comment, Mark, it's been 5 years plus. I do think this should be updated.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to do that too. Yeah.
The fact there've been a fair amount of leaks repaired in the mountain. So given the growth overall, it just makes sense to update this. And I don't know what your schedule looks like for doing that in 2022, but I think it is something we should do.
Yeah, that's certainly feasible.
So when we go above the 0 line, does that mean we'll run out of water? Or what does that really mean?
Well, you got to keep your fingers crossed, but no, yeah, that's what it's meaning.
Well, that's a computed value based on taking our largest well offline too. You know, under normal operations, that well is online, but to be fully compliant with DEQ's requirements, you could be below the line but still meet demand.
Well, aren't we getting down to to the brass tacks here? I mean, spending $40-50 million on treatment for waste. If we're threatened with any kind of water shortage, we're just wasting our time. We're wasting a lot of money. I mean, you know, we have to have some means of estimating realistically when there is going to be water shortages. this is, like I say, it's like any mining venture. You don't know when you start out at exploration whether or not you're going to hit something or whether it's going to be futile. And I think that water exploration is the same kind of risk. You don't know what you're going to, you know where it ought to be, but you don't know if it will be. And I think that we better spend some time thinking about what the outcome is if, in fact, development runs us out of water. And I've got to leave. I'm sorry I have to leave. I think this is one of the critical questions that has to be considered, and we're not considering it.
Well, I think you're right, Bill. And on the short term, I think we ought to have a disaster plan, because it is always possible that our highest producing well could go out of service for whatever reason. And so what do we do if that happens? It says that we cannot support the mountain village now, and that in a year or so, the meadow is going to be in the same place. And I think at the mountain, I think the Yellowstone Club agreement is one of those things that if we don't have excess capacity, we could shut off, but we certainly don't want to go there. And I guess the only other thing I can think of is shut off irrigation.
Tom, this is Guy at Waterkeeper. Can I make a comment?
Sure, Guy, go ahead.
I'd like to offer that, several years ago, the district undertook a preliminary report looking at the idea of potable reuse. And given the, serious consequences that come with the projected supply deficit in the graph that's shared right now, I think it's would be in the district's best interest to consider how could the idea of looking at that potable reuse, and what does that mean? You're making a big investment in increased wastewater treatment. You've already looked at what does phase 2 on that plant for further increased treatment look like, and then again, what's the feasibility of doing some part of that wastewater stream being used for potable reuse, whether indirect or direct. If you want to create the most valuable resource here, that might be one of the best tools in your tool belt. And it sounds like there's at least consensus that there is an urgency to develop, again, these options and flexibility. And I would argue from a conservation perspective, you can both, potentially create a new tool, but also get rid of that liability of, the battle that would come with a direct discharge permit application. So 2 cents to consider.
Well, thanks, Guy. And I think we have our engineering firm considering that one flaw with potable reuse is that would happen down in the meadow area. And for potable reuse up in the mountain village, you would have to create a pipeline 2,500 feet uphill in order to support that.
Hey, Mark, are you, point of clarification, this graph that we're looking at showing the use, was this graph done before we realized Cascade Wells won't deliver what they thought? Are we looking at accurate news, or is it maybe not as good as what this is showing?
It's not as good. Yeah, that pump testing we did was in 2018.
Yeah.
Other reason to update it.
Right. Mark, I don't know if you want to comment on Guy's comment about the indirect potable reuse. We commissioned a study on that. It didn't look favorable.
Yeah, my assessment was, can you meet the general requirements that are being imposed? Montana does not presently have rules specific to indirect potable reuse. So I looked at other states, and the criterion that the district couldn't meet, and this was still just in the meadow, there, was to discharge treated effluent into the meadow aquifer, produce it from wells. And you're generally having to meet about a 6-month travel time. And, the district can't get to that 6-month in the Meadow Village Aquifer. I think it was somewhere in the 3-month period. So the indirect, maybe there's other ways to look at that, but, I think that ultimately the district would need to move towards a direct potable reuse treatment level. And you could still use the aquifer as an environmental buffer, but you'd be recharging the aquifer, Meadow Village Aquifer, with water that met the direct treatment requirements. What you would gain is the public may accept that type of system more than just pipe to pipe direct reuse. You still have that problem of moving the water up to the mountain village area. That doesn't solve that because it would still be occurring in the Meadow Village system.
Tom, that's just awkward silence.
Well,
You do not turn your station, your TV.
I'm here. It's just
It's awkward in here. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, I
it
mean,
is awkward, and we got some huge challenges.
Glasses, man.
I mean, to Bill's point, I think the writing's been on the wall for a long time, and that's why we're aggressively pursuing exploration on the mountain, especially in leak detection, all these other uses. I think some we're pretty conscious of and making efforts towards. What more can we do?
Well, it doesn't make sense to me to jump into figuring out what the terms would be, given the fact they've got a P&Z meeting coming up 10th of December.
Right.
See how that plays out. I threw out this concept of updating the source capacity plan. Everybody's nodding their head. I don't hear anybody opposing that, but I do think
that's
it's
a great idea.
something we should do.
Growth rates have changed. Productivity is
taking into account snowmaking too, the potable reuse and snowmaking and what that implications are of that on the water supply is, I think, an important thing that I don't think was probably considered in 2015 as well. As far as the usage patterns and the
Biggest thing, exactly. There's so many updates, snowmaking is a great point, but you're reconfiguring the entire system right now. Mechanically, we got to really get our arms around it. But this is great data to understand what's out there for options.
I also think just some of the changes in the water usage and the charging mechanisms for water usage in the summertime, the implications of that too. The demand's gone down a little bit. It looks like it's gone down somewhat this summer from the graphs that we saw in the board packet this particular.
Right, and we've been very intentional about our rate setting and our rate process. Now we have, 4 tiers. We've increased irrigation demand, the cost of that. And you've got the framework in place where you can ratchet up irrigation numbers even more, which would have the effect of lowering demand, I would say.
Become a successful deterrent, let's put it that way. Take it from a guy with a wand.
Right.
I watched that rainstorm coming, I'm out there with a clock.
Yeah, shutting up. I think an update to that report is a good idea. And then secondly, I think there's no action on lone moose. I just don't think there's any point or whatever that I don't think there's a need to really dive into that yet, but I do think there's a need to explore a well of our own in that area next summer.
Yeah. Well, test well 9 was part of the original scope. What Mark's proposing is that we drill out in spring of 22. I'd be in favor of that.
Can I get a clarification on where test well 9 will go specifically? I just,
in your backyard.
I was just thinking, I'm looking at, you saw me on this gas, I'm going, wait a minute, That's in a parking lot. Okay, test well 9.
There's the base.
Got it.
Thunder
Okay, I missed that one.
Wherever you tell us.
Right next to the lift shack, is that what you're saying?
No, I think, is that Brian? Is that you talking?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think there's actually, I would want to go out there and look at the area. It doesn't actually have to be there. One area that looks potentially interesting is up to the northwest. It looks like the terrain's flat enough if you get to the northwest, more up across from that little pond. There's looks to me like there might be a place to get in there too.
right across the road is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because that comes in pretty steep there, coming off that hillside too.
Yes, I mean,
You're
See
talking
where
right,
that MFM number 1 well is, right? If you went due south of that,
there's a bike trail in there.
are you getting on? I've only looked on it on Google Earth. It looked like you could maybe get a rig in. Yeah, where that cursor is in there. Is that too steep?
the rock ground goes right through there.
That's actually pretty flat in there, and you could definitely, there's a road there, so you could definitely get a rig in there.
Yeah, so that area struck me as something we would certainly look at.
I got it.
Notice the blue line, that's where we need to deliver the water to.
It's a long ways away.
Convenient.
Even I can throw a rock.
Let me point this out real quick. Just looking at the water quality from those 2 wells is significantly different. MFM 1 and 2. We're looking at 10 times the amount of iron in MFM 1. So is there some mark that you could identify geologically that's causing that difference? Because we're basically, way above the treatment threshold with number 1 and below or acceptable levels.
It's the same thing.
And number 2.
Yeah, you would. I'm not sure that either of their wells go through the Kootenai. Now, they intentionally didn't want to go through the Kootenai because they anticipate iron and manganese issues in the lower Kootenai, is what they anticipated. They think that their MFM number 2 well actually penetrated the Kootenai, but it just wasn't really enough thickness to get through it. So I understand why they concluded that based on the sandstone they drilled into, but I'm not so sure they actually got there. So this test well would go through the entire formation. And, there might be some gyrations go on. We can sample water quality on the way down also, but the idea would be you'd seal out that zone that their MFM or flat iron test well number 1 shown here. We'd seal that out. That you can do that kind of stuff. So that's we wouldn't necessarily try to get just the same as what they got.
Gotcha. So the idea is that the MFM 1 is pulling from a shallower layer that's heavier and iron bearing.
For whatever reason, that's what that appears to be the case. Yeah.
Hey, Tom, I have a question. With this PUD coming up in December, do we have any role to play in that for the county as far as declaring whether we think water would be available or not?
Well, available for the rest of the district or available for their development?
For their development.
Well, I think these test wells indicate that they have more than adequate water for their development. What they are seeking is, first of all, they don't have water rights. And so they're seeking our water rights. And secondly, is they need a wastewater treatment plan that they don't have today beyond the district boundaries.
Are we asked to provide that input, Ron?
I just walked back in. What was the question?
Do we have any role to play in that PUD meeting as far as water rights available or capacity for treatment, sewer treatment, wastewater treatment?
What's the upcoming commissioner meeting for December 15th for Flatiron? Do we have a role?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
They're not really asking us that kind of stuff, are they, Steve? They're more looking at other merits of the project at this point.
Well, first off, they're not in your district,
Correct.
so that's a small detail.
Right.
And then secondly, well, and then secondly, I think, to the extent this is a question, it's a question that's contingent upon DEQ expressing adequacy for that water supply. And as Mark points out, this testing data is really old and kind of needs to be updated.
This is a couple slides I presented at the meeting this fall down at the Wampac. This is a graph showing our wastewater plant flows over time. That's about a 5% curve increase. This is a remarkable graph. This is our Meadow Mountain well production totals going back to 2005. So through rate setting, adding water meters, fixing leaks, we've actually decreased total production over time. I don't think that line will continue to drop, but to these questions about capacity, well production, that is a pretty good story right there. The Yellowstone Club is a partner in that because they've done a good job fixing some problem leaks up in their demand areas. So that helps our numbers in the mountain. When we took over the water company in 1998, and then we raised rates, it was all a fixed rate SFE thing. We had some really big production numbers the first 5-6 years of operating that.
Tom, Guy here. May I make a comment?
Go ahead, Guy.
This is in reference to Dick's question, and I would argue, again, from a conservation community perspective, I think it's well within the district's right to provide, at minimum, a letter saying, hey, these guys are outside of our district. They've asked to join our district, and we have several significant challenges in front of us that make this question of both wastewater disposal and water supply pretty specious right now. And these are, facts that are in front of the county and they should be aware of. And you don't need to take a position other than that, but providing them with your perspective that, again, water supply and wastewater disposal are serious crucibles, and they are not yet clear in any way, shape, or form about how that's going to be fully settled out in the next couple of years. I think that's in the public's interest, and I'd argue that's something that's well within your rights as a board to do, and I would encourage you to submit such a letter.
We have not received a petition for annexation, so we have nothing in front of us requesting additional land into the district.
Thanks for that clarification, Ron. I wasn't aware.
Yeah. You read their submittal and their intentions are in there, but we don't have anything on our end that makes that an official request. Yeah.
Do we have anyone from Flatiron on the call? Anything they want to add to this?
We have the letter they sent to us requesting the 2,000.
Yeah, just, communication.
It was informal.
It's good timing for communication. If they have something, it'd be good to. No one?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Well, and to Guy's point is we don't have capacity to service their development on the wastewater side. And my observation was on these water wells that they have is their full build out uses up all of that water. So the benefit to this district is really not there that I can see.
chat message from the report.
Yeah, Vince just told me there's a chat message here. Well, before I pull that up, so the commitments we've got with our old Yellowstone Club, Spanish Peaks agreements, they've got a capacity entitlement, which I believe was 38 million gallons of wastewater capacity annually for this area here. This is our district boundary. All of this also lies in Madison County. These wells are in Madison County. Originally, they were going to do on-site septic system or some sort of community drain field systems up in there. We've seen that they're kind of changing that into, we would want it all to be serviced by Big Sky Water and Sewer. And clearly the agreement is very specific to this area. There's no commitments for capacity outside of that.
Ron, how much of their PUD is within our district and how much is outside of it?
So the thumb area, the thumb development includes this area here, which is in section 29, and then this piece here and this piece here up to the road, and then you get into Big Sky property. So all of this and this is not in the district, but part of their planning envelope. Everything in the Lone Moose area is in the district and is covered by that agreement.
You don't have a percentage of the number of front door keys or whatever metric you want to use as to how much of their PUD is in the district and how much is out?
I have not done that kind of detailed analysis on that. Brian, I don't know if you've looked at the door fronts and where they fall.
I want to get a clarification on one quick thing. You just went over, you read over the topic. All right. So the district boundary is in orange or red or whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
So what it does is you have the district boundary, and then you have it, of course, in Gallatin County. We all pick up on that, where the wells are. Then you go into Thumb, where you're out of the district. Then as you head west, you go back in the district.
Right.
Got it.
It's an hourglass.
And
not even an hour. There's a full-blown gap there.
The old
complete gap.
The old RID 305. So if you look at our old boundary, the RID 305, which was our predecessor organization, section 29, the northwest quarter of 29, has always been in the district. You know, at one point we changed district boundaries to match up with service areas.
Did that come out with 27? Remember when 27 came out?
25, the Boneyard came in with the annexation.
Right. 27, I think, got dropped out.
27 got dropped out. So there was a lot of work in the meadow, not as much on the mountain. And that piece should have come out too, because we have no intention to service that.
Right now, that is in the district.
It's always been in the district.
I think that's something important. Yeah.
The 1993 boundary of the district, it's always been in.
Got it.
And then section 25, northeast quarter of 25, that came in when we did the annexations with the club.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's a key piece, though. I didn't realize that was completely broken from the district. In other words, they're bookends.
Right.
Got it.
It gets pretty western through there, just topographically to do. So that's probably why it was never removed.
It's the dam overflow.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is the dam break inundation areas in there. Got it. It's good to know.
So there, let me pull up this chat.
I think it was John Stembler wanted to, I asked a few questions. He's with Lone Peak Lookout.
Yeah, that's fine.
Go ahead, John.
Hey, good morning, y'all. Thanks for having me. I just had a few clarifications. I'm kind of just turning them back. Thanks for giving me a second. This is going back to the rate increase for workforce housing projects. Was it 0.75 SFEs per thousand before, and now the increase is at 1.2. Is that
There was no category for that, so we're creating a new category, specifically the 1.20 per thousand.
so? It's the rate increase is from 1.0 to 1.20 because there was no category.
Right, we're creating a new category. There was an old category for dorm style that we're deleting.
Okay, copy, got that. Was going to ask, does the water district currently use chlorine for water treatment? Was there any issues with this in the past? I just heard that kind of briefly mentioned over the meeting.
I'll let you, Laura.
Currently, we do not use chlorine, no.
You do not use chlorine, but you guys were discussing the possibility of it.
Yes, it may become necessary in the future, depending on the water we find and what we need to do to treat it.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. I was going to see if I could get a copy of the figure 6 projected water demand that y'all shared. Was that Mark's?
It's in the source capacity plan. 2050.
Yeah. Copy.
Yes, I can get you that.
Yeah. And so just to confirm, we are projected to run out of water for the mountain by about 2021 and the meadow by 2023, according to the figure 6 model.
Dates back to 2015.
Say that again?
That study was done in 2015.
Thank you for clarifying.
And we are going to update it.
You have that other figure?
Just so you know, John, that assumes our highest producing well in those areas fails for whatever reason. So it doesn't mean that we have a deficit only if we have some kind of catastrophe.
Copy. Thank you for that clarification. I just didn't want to put that out there if those are helpful. That's all I have for questions. Go ahead.
There's an interesting figure up on the board there, which shows how, from 2015 source capacity plan update, we've actually decreased our water usage. So figures are.
Yes, I would kind of screenshot these things to help me later. That's all I have on my end. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Where were we? I'm not good at going in reverse on this.
Well, I think the issue before us is that we got to redouble our efforts on finding water on the mountain, and I think we do need to redo the 2015 research on what our capacities are and our needs.
And since this study, Mark, I'll need to get a cost estimate from you. Update it.
Sure. Yep.
Well, thank you, Mark. I wish you had a little more success on your wells, but thank you for the update and the information. I think we're ready to move on and go to ARPA funding update.